J.K. Rowling, as a writer, has a tendency to ignore and to overlook one of the more important axioms in writing and in literature: show, don't tell. This concept is the idea that it is superior writing to have characters demonstrate their traits via their behaviour and their speech, with the reader then classifying them, rather than simply having one character or the narrator outright say that a character has some trait but doing nothing to demonstrate it. Put simply, if you want me to believe that a character is a genius, show them making intelligent decisions and solving problems. Don't just write, this character is a genius. Unfortunately, as I say, J.K. Rowling does have a tendency to overlook this principle. I would argue that there are several important characters who are described as possessing personality traits that they never really demonstrate in any real way. Three characters this issue applies to more than any other are the three characters of Dumbledore, Snape, and Voldemort. And to take a simple example of this, we're told that Voldemort was always charismatic and cunning, that he built his allies and rose to power via Slytherin guile, and yet it can be argued that we never actually see those qualities being demonstrated. A similar problem that feeds into this is that JK has a tendency to use her characters and her world as tools to drive the plot along without actually paying full attention to whether this is consistent with what she's already written. A small example of this: in the third book, Sirius is arrested by the Hit Wizards. After this point, Hit Wizards are basically forgotten altogether in favour of auras. This is because J.K. Rowling invented the auras after she'd finished writing Prisoner of Azkaban and didn't realise or didn't care that it retroactively made us say, well, why didn't they send auras after Sirius? And so, as a result of this, I wanted to dig a bit into each of those three characters, and each will get a video of their own, and discuss a central aspect of their character that I think J.K. Rowling didn't write as well as she could have done. So today's video is going to begin this process with Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Head Warlock of the Wizengamot, and Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. Chapter 1. Dumbledore's Dumb Decisions. With Dumbledore, I think there are two key traits that he is repeatedly described as having, and yet doesn't really do much to demonstrate. Firstly, that he is a good-hearted, compassionate wizard, and secondly, that he is intelligent, wise, and knowledgeable. So in order to understand how J.K. Rowling told us he was these things and then demonstrated the opposite, what we'll do is we'll go through some of Dumbledore's actions and inactions throughout the canon, and we'll ask ourselves, well, why did he do that? So here is a partial list of decisions that Dumbledore makes within the canon 7 books that are at the very least suspicious and dubious, if not outright proof of either malice or stupidity. Number 1. He doesn't try to get Sirius Black, Harry's godfather, a trial, even though his betrayal seemed to come out of nowhere and there exists literal truth serum. He doesn't question Sirius's guilt at all, even though he knows that Sirius was at Godric's Hollow the night of Voldemort's defeat, and he gave Harry and his bike to Hagrid, which proves that he was concerned with protecting Harry and throws his guilt even more into doubt. He places Harry with the Dursleys, despite the fact that McGonagall warns him off of it.
Albus, do you really think it's safe leaving him with these people? I've watched them all day. They're the worst sort of muggles imaginable.
He knows that Petunia's bitter and hateful towards her sister in the wizarding world, and he knows that she has a muggle husband and a baby of her own. He leaves Harry on the Dursleys' doorstep with nothing but a note.
Good luck.
No money for upkeep, no face-to-face conversation, no contact info for if Harry starts displaying accidental magic or anything, just, here's a child, look after him for 11 years, then we'll take him back, but you'll still be responsible for feeding and clothing him every summer till he's 17. Cheers. He places the Philosopher's Stone in the school, knowing that Voldemort is after it. He places traps in front of the stone that an 11-year-old can get past, and waits until partway through the year to put the actual defence, the mirror, in place, and even then that's only after an 11-year-old has found this dangerous magical artefact in an abandoned classroom after hours. He hires Quirrell knowing that he's working for Voldemort. He keeps Quirrell on staff even after he's released a troll into the school.
Troll in the dungeon! Troll in the dungeon!
Tried to kill Harry in public and made repeated attempts to steal the stone. He flies to the Ministry instead of fluing, apparating, portkeying, phoenix travelling, or using a house elf, making it very hard for him to come back in time to stop Quirrell. He was a teacher when the Chamber of Secrets was opened the first time, knows who did it, and knows that the person who everyone thinks did it didn't, and yet makes apparently no attempt to find the chamber or figure out what the monster is, and when the chamber then gets reopened, he similarly makes no real effort. Or he's less effective at research than a 12-year-old who figures it out in part of a term with far fewer clues. He finishes Harry's second year with proof positive that the Dark Lord has Horcruxes, and yet he doesn't tell anybody about this. Even though he has loads of trustworthy people around him, he could tell at least part of the story to. Moody, Snape, Lupin, Kingsley, Amelia Bones, the Unspeakables. He spends 3+ years between Chamber of Secrets and Half-Blood Prince, either doing nothing to try and find the Horcruxes, or searching and being extremely ineffective. I mean, remember that it only took, less than a year for 3 17-year-olds to find the cup and diadem, and they're the two that Dumbledore never got close to. He didn't manage to find any until Half-Blood Prince. He goes for the ring alone, telling nobody anything. Only after he's already cursed himself and knows he's got limited time to live, that's when he tells someone about the Horcruxes, and he chooses to tell a 17-year-old. But he doesn't give him much information, not even, the sword is useful for destroying these things, and he tells him not to ask for help from any of the trustworthy people I've already mentioned. He doesn't notice in Goblet of Fire that one of his oldest friends is being impersonated for an entire year, and another person he's very familiar with has been under the Imperious Curse all year.
The Chinese fireball. Ooh.
He doesn't put any real security measures on the goblet that would stop an older student entering a younger student. That's why he asks Harry if that's what happened.
Everything is a conspiracy theory.
I protest!
Harry!
I protest!
Harry, did you put your name in a Goblet of Fire?
No, sir.
You asked one of the oldest students to do it for you?
No, sir.
Let alone a deliberate conspiracy by Voldemort. I mean, just fucking have a portrait watching the cup and that would have solved the whole plot. He lets Harry face all 3 Triwizard tasks without any help, even though he knows that Harry didn't enter himself and that his survival is far more important than the actual rules of the tournament. He somehow doesn't notice when Crouch makes the cup into a portkey that leaves Hogwarts grounds, or have any way of stopping that, or finding Harry once he's gone. He allows the Ministry and the press to call him and Harry stupid liars without putting up any real fight, like, getting Harry to give a pensive memory, or take Veritaserum, or give an interview to the Prophet, or use the fact that you're the most politically powerful wizard in the country. He isolates and distances himself from Harry for the whole of 5th year, and doesn't tell him anything about why, not even, until you learn occlumency, I can't be too close in case Voldemort gets to me through you, which it would have been perfectly safe to tell him. He has Snape be the one to give Harry occlumency lessons, even though that's obviously a bad idea, and doesn't bother to check that he's doing it properly. He doesn't stop Malfoy, a marked Death Eater, from making multiple assassination attempts on him, even though every single time he tries, he ends up getting other students nearly killed. He doesn't tell anybody, or leave any hint to be found after his death, of his plan with Snape, leaving a huge amount of risk in the equation. I mean, what if Harry had succeeded in killing Snape at the end of Half-Blood Prince? That would have fucked the whole plan up. He doesn't tell Harry that he's a Horcrux.
I think I've known for a while.
He hinges his entire plan for Voldemort's defeat on an obscure bit of wand lore, and doesn't tell anybody that. He leaves the trio the most cryptic possible clues as to the Horcrux hunt, and one item that he knows the Ministry won't let them have, the sword, instead of, before he dies, giving Harry a fuck-off jar of pensive memories and a stack of relevant books. Now that is just a sample of the outright questionable or just awful decisions that Dumbledore makes over the course of the 7 books. You can probably find or write a justification for some or even most of them, but all of them, and the 30+ more that I can think of off the top of my head? I mean, here's my full list, by the way. Chapter 2. Doylist versus Watsonian explanations. In literary analysis, there are often said to be 2 types of explanation for any given element of a story. These are the in-universe and the out-of-universe or meta explanations. Usually, these are referred to as the Doylist and the Watsonian angles. The Doylist explanation is named for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, and it is the real-world story reason for something to take place, as the author themselves would describe it. Conversely, the Watsonian view is the in-story explanation, named for John Watson. It's the answer that a character would give if asked the question in the story. In truth, all story elements exist due to Doylist reasons, but the characters cannot know that, and so if there is no satisfying Watsonian explanation, that's where you get a plot hole. So as we're talking Harry Potter, we'll call the 2 explanations the Rowling explanation and the Granger explanation. The Rowling explanation is what JK herself would say if you said, "Why did you choose to have this character make this decision?" and it'll refer to the process and rules of writing. The Granger explanation is what Hermione would say if another character asked her, why did this person make this decision? And it will attempt to refer to the logic of the world and to established facts about the characters. So I'll give you an example to try and make things a bit clearer. Why did Sirius die in the Department of Mysteries? The Rowling explanation is this. Sirius as a character being around was incompatible with the character arc that I wanted for Harry, his angst, loneliness, distrust of authority, etc. And that by killing Sirius in the Department of Mysteries in the way I did, I created a strong emotional moment which engaged my readers and laid groundwork for both plot and character progression in later books, Harry's reluctance to involve people in the Horcrux hunt being a partial result of his guilt over people dying for him, for example. By contrast, the Granger explanation can't reference story or plot, and so it would look something like this. Harry was distressed and emotional, and tired from the occlumency lessons and the burdens of his life, and Voldemort manipulated him with a false vision, which led to him making a poor choice, in part due to his own failings, and in part due to the justified frustration he felt with the isolation and ignorance of the adults around him that year, and Sirius, because he's his godfather, naturally came to help. But because Sirius had spent years in Azkaban and then years locked up in Grimmauld Place, he wasn't on top form, made a mistake, and Bellatrix killed him. Now actually for this example, both explanations are solid. They're both consistent with the story so far, the world and how it works, and the characters as they were described to us. But this is not always the case. So now we understand the concept of a Rowling versus a Granger explanation, let's try to find the answer to the question, why did Dumbledore make all those stupid decisions? I'll give you a few possible answers, and you can decide for yourself which one or which combination you think is correct. Number 1, the Rowling explanation. J.K. Rowling was writing a children's book, and due to an over-reliance on tell versus show and a subordination of character and world consistency to plot elements, such as when she admits to having forced Ron with Hermione without laying proper groundwork just because she liked that idea, which means that although she wanted Dumbledore to be seen as a wise, caring man, she had him act in ways which just aren't compatible with it. 2. A Granger explanation. Dumbledore is not as intelligent as everybody thinks, and he frequently overlooked very, very basic pieces of logic like, why would you lock a door, leave the key to the door in the room, and then leave a broom so that someone can catch the key from where it's flying? Number 3. Another Granger explanation. Dumbledore is not as good a person as everybody thinks, and he has a tendency towards an amoral style of manipulation, a chess master approach where he moves human lives around without thought for their feelings or the danger they get placed in order to achieve his own view of what the greater good may be. For example, he would have known that the chamber housed a basilisk, and known that he could have found it given a few days of work, but he deliberately did nothing in order to stage Harry's fight with the basilisk. Number 4, another Granger explanation. Dumbledore is actually just an evil piece of shit. He was maliciously trying to cause Harry harm, not for the greater good, but for his own purposes. Final chapter. Conclusions. So, I think you can make a fairly convincing argument for 3 of those 4 explanations. I don't think you can really say Dumbledore was evil, because if he was trying to hurt Harry, he could have been way more effective at it. So I think it's more likely that he was either using Harry as a pawn, or doing his best to protect Harry and failing horribly. But, you know, as I mentioned before, in reality all things are doylist. In truth, the reason Dumbledore makes these poor decisions is because J.K. Rowling didn't think his decisions through properly, or she deliberately had him act out of character as a plot device, and because she has a tendency to invent new world elements like Floo powder or Veritaserum, without considering how their existence must affect the plots that she's already finished. And so I hope this video is interesting, and that it's done something of a good job of explaining how I think that J.K. Rowling dropped the ball somewhat when writing Dumbledore. This should also explain, for those of you who are interested, why one of the more popular tropes in Harry Potter fanfiction is Dumbledore bashing. It's difficult to the point of impossibility in my eyes to find a Watsonian, Granger, in-universe explanation for why Dumbledore does all of the things he does that doesn't paint him in a fairly poor light.